Hi, so today I will be talking about conflict management and performance. It's about how conflict management can affect performance from followers and employees and the people in the organization overall. So, the first thing that I talk about in my essay is about conflict. And the definition from the textbook is about um, how it's one party that perceives its interests are being opposed or set back by another party. And that's just basically, for example, how me, if I have a goal of reaching, let's just say, making $1,000 today, and if an individual is in my way, slowing down my progress throughout the day to the point where I might not reach my goal, it would create conflict between me and that other individual. The next thing that I talked about is how conflict is different in a modern perspective. What may be modern perspective, the year now is 2020 and it's March. So, what seems like conflict today may not have been conflict back 10 years ago or 10 years later. It also has to do with personal conflict where uh, I could have some conflict in my life right now where I might not be, for example, right now, right here, a conflict for me will be this essay and this homework, this project. Um, and that could be different tomorrow morning. Once I'm done with this, I move on to a different conflict. But that's personal conflict, and it's more goal oriented. It doesn't have to do with an organization, so that's why I call it personal conflict. But going back to modern conflict, there was research done recently based on a 10-year progression. I believe it was 2007 and 2017 here in my paper. And what they found was that um, management studies in conflict management, although relying on established and common theoretical foundations, evolve around different streams. So the examples that they provided was gender, emotions, and power and negotiations, culture, conflict management styles in the workplace, trust and cooperation, mediation and social conflict, performance and governance. And that's just a small aspect of the different conflicts that has changed over the 10 years. Especially going back to gender, one thing that I noticed is that back in 2007, there were not a lot of talks about the LGBT and people being gay and all that stuff. And now, forward 2020, it's a really big discussion. Um, Also talking about emotions and power and negotiations as company and organizations evolved. I've realized that companies are they're more likely to negotiate with their employees now, and listen to their employees compared to what it was 10 years ago from now, which was 2010. And if we also look back through the progression of suicide rates, emotion is a huge thing nowadays. A lot of songs and awareness, suicidal awareness, mental health awareness. It's really big now today compared to what it was 10 years ago. So that's just my example of modern perspective of conflict. I don't know what the conflict is going to be 10 years from now, but that's the modern conflict for today, this generation. Um, there's also language conflict. And language conflict here, I wrote it down in my essay, and it's about people who have to speak to each other every day at work. And there are some words that can trigger, uh, it can trigger some emotions through some people. Um, and also just the things that we say, we gotta watch what we say to people nowadays. So an example of this would be somebody who has a cup at work. Um, and then I could say that, oh, that cup looks very cheap or doesn't look that good, but to that person, that cup could have been given to him, to her or to her by somebody really important to them. It's also important that in the workplace we don't use words that seems like we're shutting people down when they come to us with ideas, especially if they come up to us and have a new idea, and before we represent it, we shut them down. It's not that we want to shut them down on purpose, it's just that we've moved on to a different process and we can't go back to the first phase of the process. An example of this would be a team getting together, working on a project, and we decided on what we wanted to do and we moved on with it. And then somebody comes back and said, oh, you know what, instead of doing that, let's do this instead. We already moved on to the second phase of the project. And the best thing that we could tell this individuals as leaders is that, hey, that's a great idea for a different project. But for now, let's move on with this. And if this doesn't work, we can always go back to the plan or idea that this individual had. So just positive language, being optimistic. The next thing that I talked about is why people avoid conflict. And people avoid conflict for many reasons. Sometimes it could be they don't want to look bad, or um, they could be feeling unconfrontational, unconfront confrontational. Yeah, some that word. I know a lot of people who don't like confrontation. So that's just because they get really emotional. Their emotions take over them, and they say things that they don't want to say. They don't mean to say. Um, and reaching on 8 minutes here, uh, I would like to talk about personality conflict and personality conflict. We've done a lot of assessments, observational assessments over the course of this class, and we learned more about ourselves. And something I just got to say about that is that the more that we know about ourselves, the easier it is to resolve the conflict that we get ourselves into. For example, um, I personally scored a high score on self awareness, so that just shows me that I can play my strengths to that area, and help other people in that area who want help in that area, or know how to acknowledge when they're not being self-aware. So um, I provided the table 13.1 uh, in my essay too, how to deal with personality conflicts, just some tips. um, Intergroup conflict, just cross cultural people with different experience, different backgrounds. They seem to think that they're better than other groups, or that other groups are all the same and they're less than them, which leads to this intergroup conflict. But it could be resolved if they work together. Going over 8 minutes here, going towards 10 minutes. Next thing is negotiation. I brought up negotiating about 2 minutes into the video. Um, for me personally, I think that the opposite of negotiating is a demand. For example, there's only one way to do it. Either you pay me more or I quit. That's demanding. If an employee came up to me like that, uh, I don't even know if I want to negotiate with them. Um, but if they came to me and they wanted to negotiate their salary or their pay, like, oh, this is my life situation, life crisis, financial situation, financial crisis. I would like to be paid this more, or hey, I'm a great employee. I was wondering if I can get a raise. I would definitely, personally, me, I will put that into consideration. I will negotiate with them, but not if they demand it. If they demand something, I don't know if I would even negotiate with them unless they're really somebody who I really need in my organization. Um, I would say that, hey, I can't do that, but we can talk about it and see what we can do about it. So yeah, that's overall conflict management and negotiation. Um, Overall, another recent study by Awan 2014 stated that in his research, if management approaches the conflict resolution strategically, successfully, it will lead to high performance. And if they don't, it will lead to a negative impact on organization and negative impact on performance. So, based on the sources that I use, the references that I use, they back up the point that approaching conflict management strategically can affect the performance of employees. So that's all I have written down, and I hope that during the spring break, I do a great job in the other courses. And I enjoyed this course, and I'm looking forward to other courses with you, Dr. Selena. Thank you.